Hey everyone, welcome to the January 25th edition of Octagon Outlook here on Line Movement. My name is James Lynch. Happy to be joined today by one of my good friends and one of the best in the business, TSN's Aaron Bronsteter, joining us here to recap UFC 257. Aaron, how are you today?
I'm good, man. I'm excited to recap this event because it was so much fun, especially at the top.
Certainly was. We got a lot to talk about. Before we get into that, though, if you're watching this live or you're watching the replay, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button. That's an easy way to support the show. And you guys make sure to check out all the interviews we've been doing over the last little bit. We got Clay Guida over the weekend. We had Michael Bisping on Friday. So really giving you guys the best interviews possible. But let's talk about UFC 257. What a crazy card this was, Aaron. First pay-per-view of the year, and it definitely delivered. Let's start with the main event. It is Dustin Poirier knocking out Conor McGregor. Even as I say that, that still seems a little bit odd, to just, here we are on Monday where Conor McGregor is lost by knockout, first time in 27 career fights. I mean, I know he got knocked out in boxing, but I'm talking in MMA. How surprised were you, Aaron, with this result, especially with the way Poirier finished the fight?
The most surprising thing to me is the round. I thought that if Poirier was going to get a knockout, it would be in third, fourth, fifth round, like later in the fight. For it to happen, I guess, just past the midway point in the second round, I thought that was a little bit early compared to what I had thought. But all week, last week, in every single interview that I did, I said people are ignoring a lot of vital facts going into this fight, and that couldn't have proven to be more true if I had even tried. Because when you look at what McGregor has done the last 4 years in terms of MMA, in terms of boxing and all of that, it's obviously, it is what it is. He boxed Floyd Mayweather. He lost to Khabib. He beats Cowboy Cerrone in 40 seconds. But the problem was we didn't get to see the new weapons. We didn't get to see more weaknesses. We didn't get to see, there was just, the sample size was so small. And then if you look at the last 4 years of Dustin Poirier's sample size, he established himself as an elite fighter. Going into that fight, he was the elite version of Dustin Poirier, not the prospect version that we saw him in the first fight. And you see that knockout over and over again leading up to the fight. You see that first fight, and it becomes the gospel. It becomes Dustin Poirier is bad against powerful lefties. We have the Michael Johnson knockout. We have the Conor McGregor knockout. That's the one fact you can enter that fight with. Every other thing going into that fight was all just speculation. None of it was true. And when people ignored those facts and ignored how much better Dustin Poirier had gotten, I thought they were doing him a major disservice. And watching almost, so many different preview videos, including your own, in terms of fighters predicting the fight. And you just thought it was all on McGregor. Everybody liked McGregor. And I just felt that they were ignoring a lot of really important things going into this fight.
It was actually kind of the opposite with the fighters. Most of the fighters actually picked Poirier in this fight, and you should have seen the fans trashing them. It was hilarious. And that's what makes this result so interesting to me, is that so many people were wrong about this. And I know it's a lot of Conor's fans, very passionate, obviously very much believe in their guy. But the fact that people were writing off Poirier so much, like this isn't even going to be close, Poirier has no chin. I think the one thing we got to look at, you mentioned the activity. I mean, Poirier's fought 8 times since 2017. McGregor just 3, and that's including the Floyd Mayweather fight. A lot of people were saying, yeah, but Dustin's taken a lot of damage. I mean, that didn't matter here. I mean, it was the fact that Poirier went out there and knocked out McGregor, I think speaks volumes to the fact that I don't think a lot of that makes a difference. I think the activity did play a role in that. You see Poirier getting better and better, and just had an amazing game plan in the fight with the leg kicks and just adjusting quite well. I am curious though, Aaron, how did you score that first round? Because I had McGregor winning, and this idea that, of course it's easy to say this after this, oh, Conor looked terrible, whatever. I still thought he won the first round, and I thought he looked good in that opening stanza. How did you score that? I was curious.
I agree with you completely. I also had a 10-9 McGregor, and I thought he looked very good in that first round. There was a bit of a feeling out process, but I knew that as soon as that first round had ended, that's when Poirier was going to start picking up the momentum. Because once you get out of the first round with McGregor, it becomes a different fight. And to go back on something that you just said about Poirier having the terrible chin, how many knockdowns does Dustin Poirier has he faced in his UFC career? Do you know the answer to that?
I don't know the exact answer, but I do know that he's only been knocked out one time at 155, and that was to Michael Johnson.
He has faced 2 knockdowns in his UFC career, Michael Johnson and Conor McGregor. So This misnomer that he's got this terrible chin, it's actually the opposite. His chin has proven to be great in the last couple of years. You see him in these wars with Gaethje, Alvarez. His chin has been basically granite since that McGregor fight, that Michael Johnson fight, especially at 155 pounds. And this guy's a big boy at 155 pounds. He was probably around 185 in the cage, I would have to guess, against McGregor. He looked really big. And I just thought, again, people are really ignoring how much more hydrated he is at 55. And while, again, you can't discount the trouble that he's had against rangy lefties with power, like a Conor McGregor, you also can't discount the things that everybody else seemed to be discounting, which was that his chin has held up in these big fights. And, people said if it gets into a firefight, if it becomes a firefight, it's his fight to lose. And that's not true either. If Dustin Poirier is able to get this at a range and take away the range from McGregor, And that's what he did. He turned it into a firefight, but he turned it into a firefight at a close range. That's where he was going to have the advantage, and he did. So again, I think people just ignored a lot of different things going into this fight that made them believe that this was going to be the same thing as the first fight.
We'll talk about what's next for McGregor in a second here. Of course, that's the thumbnail image, and I'm sure what everyone wants to know. And we sort of talked a bit about this on Twitter yesterday, but we'll get into it in a second here. But what about Dustin Poirier? Because, and maybe Conor is in those plans, but I think it's highly unlikely we see a trilogy fight next. Dustin saying post-fight, I don't want Michael Chandler. Who do you think he's angling for here? What did you make of those statements?
I don't necessarily think he's angling for anybody, because he was also asked about Oliveira and said, well, Oliveira deserves it more. Oliveira's on a win streak, and he's similar to me. He's a guy that's been in the UFC for a long time and has finally earned his way to the top. I think that he's right, though. I think that one win by Chandler shouldn't negate all of the work that Oliveira's put in. Oliveira had a lopsided win over Tony Ferguson, and Tony Ferguson has been a top 2 guy in the division for like 5 years, top 2-3 guy, right? So you can't negate all of that stuff just because it happens to be on one big night. A great debut. I don't think I've ever seen a better debut than Michael Chandler's in the UFC in terms of somebody coming from a different organization and doing what he did. I was having trouble thinking of even a close second. But you also can't discount the fact that his last 5 years in MMA have been kind of lackluster. The wins that he has, I mean, the Ben Henderson win, I'll give him. I think that was a really good win. But the name value of a guy like Sidney Outlaw, Goichi Yamauchi, the loss to Pitbull in the first round.
Brandon Gertz.
Brandon Gertz, Primus. Like these aren't guys that are top 20 guys in lightweight MMA across the board. So you have to look at Oliveira's strength of schedule and his victories, and they're just better. It's a better caliber of opponents. I think that Oliveira should be next for the title shot. For Poirier, which should be for the title.
Yeah, I'm completely in agreement with you there. To me, listen, with Poirier winning, it changes things, right? With Conor, obviously, there's the business aspect of who does he fight next in terms of marketability and things like that. I think with Poirier, he's definitely established himself as a bigger star than he was before by beating McGregor, but I don't think we need to worry about who he fights in terms of pay-per-view buys. I think, a Charles Oliveira fight and Michael Chandler fight, I don't think there's a huge difference in pay-per-view buys. I really don't. Chandler, by the way, cut a great promo, and we're going to talk about his fight in a second here, but I think the UFC should do the right thing and reward Oliveira, because it's not that he just, dismantled Tony Ferguson. The fight before that, no one's beat Kevin Lee like that. I mean, that was an incredible beatdown in that fight before, and I think what people forget about that fight is that Oliveira beat Lee at his own game. He outstruck him. I mean, that was so impressive. Oliveira could have easily tried to take this to the ground and try and work his jiu-jitsu, but the fact that we've seen an evolution in his stand-up and him outboxing Kevin Lee, I don't think should go unnoticed as well. So I'm with you, Aaron. I'm on Team Oliveira, and I hope to see him get that shot. But the UFC, they're going to probably be trying to angle for Chandler and Poirier next as well. Let's get into the Michael Chandler fight. You're right. What a debut for him. I was with you where I felt like Chandler had not beaten the type of opponents that, say, Dan Hooker had fought, right? Hooker, if you look at going into the fight, had fought better competition, but Chandler looked very relaxed, very composed. I think he seized the moment here, and what a way to do it by finishing Dan Hooker in the first round. What's so incredible about this is you look at who Dan Hooker's fought, and even some of his losses, even the Edson Barbosa loss, which was a one-sided fight, Barbosa didn't put him out in the first round. It wasn't that quick.
He kept getting up like a zombie.
Exactly. And for Chandler to put him out as quickly as he did really made a statement and really sort of showed the UFC that they were right in putting him as the backup to Gaethje and Khabib Nurmagomedov, right? Because they were obviously very high on him. So Chandler had an A+ performance. Love the promo after the fight. If you get on the mic and you get some mic time, that's how you use it. Love that Michael Chandler did that. Just your overall thoughts on the fight and what Chandler was able to do on Saturday.
Yeah, for sure. And Oliveira's at a bit of a disadvantage because he barely speaks any English, right? So when you get the opportunity to cut a promo like that, people are like, they buy in. Hindsight's 2020. I liked Hooker in that fight, but man, are we stupid for not betting Chandler by knockout at plus 600. Like, I know. What were we all thinking? You look at that number. I looked at that number before the fight several times, and I was like, am I missing something here? That number shouldn't be that high. And I just didn't, I didn't recommend it to the TSN Edge folks. Although, if you think that somebody else is going to win the fight, it doesn't matter what the value is. You should still always look at who you think is going to win that fight. But at the same time, I mean, there's not much more you can say other than him knocking out Dan Hooker in the first round is a massive statement. An incredible debut, great promo, great post-fight press conference, although I do believe it went down a little bit longer than it probably should have. But Chandler just really, I think, made a big statement on Saturday night and proved that he can hang with the top guys at lightweight. And I was wrong about him because I thought, at age 35, doesn't matter how good you are, that top 5 of the lightweight division is going to be very difficult for him to beat. And he made it look very easy against Dan Hooker.
He certainly did. The only other debut that comes to mind that was as impressive of a fighter coming over from another organization would probably be Anderson Silva when he fought Chris Liebman, right? But that's, I mean, you have to go back years, but you're right. It's very rare to have a fighter come over and have the type of impact that Chandler did right off the bat.
The one I was thinking of actually was Fedor and Affliction. Like when Fedor came to Affliction, and he came out with that ominous Russian music, and then he just came and dismantled Tim Sylvia, who was like the UFC heavyweight champion.
Yeah,
it was like under a minute. I was like, whoa, okay, well, now everybody understands what this, what people were talking about in terms of how good Fedor was. But that's a good your example too of Anderson Silva beating Liebman in the way that he did was certainly impressive.
Especially because I don't think Liebman had been knocked out at that point, and Liebman was sort of known for an iron chin. And here's Anderson Silva, what was it, 40, 50 seconds going out there and knocking out a guy that was pretty popular in the Ultimate Fighter. So, but either way, good win for Chandler. I think it's safe to say now with Hooker, I think, he's got to go back to the drawing board here. And I do wonder, he's a big guy for the weight class. I do wonder if maybe 170 is better. I don't know if it's too soon to say that. I mean, he did lose to a guy in Chandler who's obviously on the right track here. That's first. So. First 3 round. What was it? His last 3 fights have ended in the first round by knockout for Chandler. So obviously he's on a roll. But I think the one thing we can say with Hooker now is he's having a hard time getting over that hump, right? It was Barbosa first, and then it was Poirier. Now losing to Chandler here, it's another step back for him trying to get to that contender spot. And it's weird because if you think about it, I believe Hooker's been in the UFC longer than both Adesanya and Volkanovski, yet they've achieved gold and he hasn't. So you kind of feel for Dan Hooker here. What do you think is next for him? Because obviously it's back to the drawing board.
I think he goes to 170. He walks around at like 175. He's actually, in terms of his weight, he's probably a perfect prototype 155. He was cutting way too much for 45. He won't fight at 45 again. But at 55, I think he's got a great build for the division. Again, you said back to the drawing board. I think that's a good way to put it. I think that you should put him in there against maybe Tony Ferguson, somebody else that's kind of at a bit of a crossroads right now in the division. That's how I would match make it. I would have him against Ferguson. I think that's a fun fight, and I think then you're able to reestablish one of those guys as being on the cusp of that top tier at lightweight. I thought that the winner of Chandler and Hooker was going to be the one that would basically enter tier 1 of the lightweight division, enter as a contender and establish themselves in that way. But I guess Chandler's that guy now. I think if you look at the tier 1 guys, if Khabib's out of the mix, which it appears to be the case, you've got Conor, you've got Poirier, you've got Oliveira, you've got Michael Chandler and Justin Gaethje, and those are like the 5 guys that I believe are in like the tier 1 of the lightweight division.
There were some other fights on this card, of course, because the focus was obviously on the lightweight division, but we had a really interesting fight in the women's flyweight division. Joanne Calderwood getting the unanimous decision over Jessica Eye. I thought this was one of Joanne Calderwood's best performances. Eye's got very good stand-up, and for Calderwood to go out there, go back to her Muay Thai roots, really, implement a lot of kicks, a lot of good shots. I thought it was a solid performance from her and a nice bounce back from that really unfortunate loss to Jennifer Maia. It was a lot of bad blood heading into this one. What did you think of Calderwood, and what do you think is next for her in the flyweight division, which appears to be a bit open outside of the top with Valentina Shevchenko?
Yeah, she put on a clinic, and Jessica Eye hung in tough. Like, Jessica Eye looked okay in that fight. It's not like she was getting completely obliterated, but I loved the way that she was using the kick on the exit. I thought that was just such a good move. Like, they must have noticed a weakness in Jessica Eye's game, coming out of the clinch. And every single time coming out of that clinch, she would hit her with a nice body kick or a nice, throw a head kick, throw a leg kick. Like, she really mixed it up. And I thought that Calderwood has never looked better than that. I think that was by far her best performance, and a performance that puts her back into the mix for the title 25, which is kind of wide open right now. I mean, I think Andrade will get the next shot, but if Calderwood can get another win after that one, I think she's right back there as the top contender.
I think if Andrade does get that title shot, you do her and Lauren Murphy. I think no one's more deserving. I mean, I think Murphy's done enough to get a title shot, but it doesn't seem like the fans are on her side. It doesn't seem like the UFC's on her side to give her that title shot. So I think Calderwood makes the most sense. She was supposed to have the title shot. She lost it. What better way to get 2, wins over 2 quality opponents in Eye and Murphy, I think would make a lot of sense there, but we'll see what happens. And for Jessica Eye,
she wins that fight. She's right there too.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's to me a fight to do as well. Like, if Murphy wins, then obviously she's done enough to get that title shot as well. She's turned things around. We'll see what happens with Eye. I don't think she gets cut just because flyweight's a little bit, kind of, like you said, wide open. I think they'll give her maybe a prospect next, maybe get the prospect to build off her in that division. But what do you see next for Jessica Eye?
I think that I like the way you're thinking. Maybe she faces the winner of Grasso and Macy Barber. I think that would make a lot of sense. Too. Yeah. So and let's not give Barber that win. I mean, Alexa Grasso is really, really tough. So I think that would be probably the best way to match make with her, like you said. And they did that with her previously against Viviane Araújo, I believe it was, where they kind of had somebody that was on the come up. And Araújo looked great last Wednesday. but they had somebody that was kind of on the up and up, and they tried to use I as a gatekeeper, and I shut that gate. So I think that the Macy Barber and Alexa Grasso winner for her would be a good fit.
Yeah, really even fight, that one coming up here pretty soon. In the middleweight division, we had Makhmed Muradov getting the win over Andrew Sanchez. Really good win here, and nice that he got the finish here because he looked good. I mean, definitely he was ahead on the scorecards heading into that third round, but to get a finish over Andrew Sanchez, which poor Andrew Sanchez, all of his UFC, I think stoppage losses or third round knockout if you look at his career, which is kind of crazy, but good win for him, and I think someone they can build upon here. 25-6 record now. I thought Muradov looked outstanding on Saturday.
Again, hindsight being 2020, Muradov round 3 plus 1,000. You know,
oh wow,
I mean,
okay.
We should have seen the writing on the wall there, but Muradov looks like one to watch. I love his build for the division. He's tall, he's lanky. Reminds me a bit of like Kendall Grove, you know, like that kind of a build for the middleweight division. I think his range is going to give people a lot of problems. I'm anxious to see how he does in the grappling. I would have liked to have seen Andrew Sanchez try to grapple a little bit more and test him in that realm, because that is Sanchez's background, of course, is his wrestling, and that's always, I think, been one of his big strengths, is using the wrestling to set up the striking. I don't think he did that enough. He didn't mix it up enough. I was unsure why Faraz, I don't believe, was in his corner. I think that had Faraz been in his corner, maybe you would have seen some adjustments made. But I think that Muradov certainly looks like one to watch in this division. I love the way that he moves like a welterweight, and he's like the height of a light heavyweight. So it's a really interesting mix for him in terms of what I think he can do in there.
And at middleweight, they need some new blood. I think this is a good placement on the card. He's a Floyd Mayweather guy, so I think, you'll see them continue to build him up, and I think this was good placement. And I thought it was a good fight. I know some fans weren't like blown away, but hey, look, I thought it was a good fight to have on the pay-per-view, in my opinion.
Hey, here's a fight for you. How about Muradov versus Edmund Shabazzi? And I don't know if Shabazian's lined up with anybody right now, but man, that would be a fun one. Yeah, that would be a good one.
But I'm with you. I get the thinking there to kind of figure out who the better guy is. But my issue is if Shabazian loses another fight here, you've kind of wasted the buildup of him, right? Like you had him, wins over Stewart and Tavares and all that, and you sort of built him up to this thing, and he got dominated against Brunson. I mean, that fight wasn't close as the fight was moving on. So I don't know if this would be, I think skill-wise, it would be good to figure out where both guys are, but then I do worry if Shabazian loses another fight because he's still relatively young, right? How old is he? I think 22 or something?
He's young, very young. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But you know what? We never got to see that fantasy MMA fight between Ronda Rousey and Floyd Mayweather. So now you've got the two fighters that they manage going.
There you go.
So it just makes sense.
Good thinking.
1 + 1 = 2.
I didn't even think of that. That's good. Speaking of the women, Marina Rodriguez with a nice upset win over Amanda Ribas. I said this on Monday. The odds were off on this one. Look, Amanda Ribas, some nice wins. She was undefeated, I think, heading into this in the UFC anyways. But Marina Rodriguez just came like a bat out of hell in that second round. Caught her. Herb Dean with a bit of a weird stoppage. I think that first one, he might have called it there. But yeah, she gets the knockout win. I forget what the prop was on that, but it was something pretty high here. But Amanda Ribas
plus 1450.
Yeah, exactly. There's another one. How did we miss the odds on that? But Marina Rodriguez really, she's now the hot star, I think, in that weight class as far as an up and comer. And consider that she just lost a split decision to Carla Esparza before this. Really, I think shows how good she really is. So, Rodriguez looked outstanding. I think they're going to steer her towards a title shot. And I think with Ribas, it's back to the drawing board and a bounce back fight. But what did you think of this fight?
Yeah, I also had a TSN Edge recommended play on Marina Rodriguez for that very reason. I thought the odds were way too long. Remember, Rodriguez was considered one of these hot upstarts for a time, and her striking is really solid. And that was the one part of Ribas's game that I wasn't sold on, was her striking. And I thought, I thought that Ribas should have been the favorite, and I thought that she looked really good in the first round, obviously, but I had a lot of questions about how she would look in the stand-up against someone as good as Rodriguez. And obviously, my questions ended up being correct. But myself and Dan Tom, your colleague at Line Movement, actually talked about how women's lines are inflated when you get somebody who's like the next big thing, who people believe to be like this next, future champion type. They always overcorrect the steering wheel. And I thought that was the case for sure this week with Marina Rodriguez and Ribas. Because who are Ribas's wins? You have Paige Van Zandt. The Mackenzie Dern win, very legit.
Emily Whitmire.
But I think that Ribas is a better striker than Mackenzie Dern, and she had the grappling to kind of keep Dern out of that part of the fight. But then you look at the level of strikers that she's fought, and none of them are even close to the level of Marina Rodriguez. So that was kind of a let's see how this goes type thing. If she's able to beat Rodriguez, especially from a striking capacity, now we can talk about her being the real deal. But her wins prior to that didn't convince me that she was the a minus 300 plus favorite against the Marina Rodriguez.
Yeah, another one was Paige Van Zandt against Rose Namajunas. Remember, Paige was the favorite in that fight, believe it or
Yeah.
not. So
Yeah.
there's another example of people buying into the hype too much. So yeah, big win for Rodriguez. Hebus back to the drawing board. We'll go through the prelims. We won't spend a ton of time on this. Not a really strong prelims, but some notable things happening. Obviously, we had Arman taking on Matt Frevola. Arman getting the win here by decision. I think it's tough to kind of gauge from this fight because both guys had their opponents switched up like mid-fight week. Frevola, one of those guys that always comes through as the underdog. Did not this time. But what did you think of this fight? Arman, I think, looks like definitely a guy to keep an eye on in that division for sure.
I was very impressed by his wrestling, and obviously his first fight in the UFC against Islam Makhachev, he was at a bit of a deficit in terms of wrestling, but still very young. His striking is really, really good too, but he's just utilized a good game plan. Wrestle with Frevola, keep him down. Why take chances on the feet when you don't have to? If you can implement that kind of a game plan and win, you do it. Unfortunate that he missed the weight. I would have liked to see him make weight for this particular card, but yeah. I think that he looks like a guy that's a real up-and-comer in that division. Not like there aren't already enough up-and-comers in that division, but man, he looks really good. And I would have liked to see how he did against Haqparast. I thought that line was a little bit off. I think Haqparast is another really strong prospect, and Haqparast was like a plus 275 underdog. Obviously, he got ill and had to withdraw from the fight. And Frevola's opponent, unfortunately, no longer in the UFC due to some weird James Bond enemy type stuff.
Yeah,
but
crazy. But
quite good. Quite a good showing for Tsarukyan.
How about Brad Tavares getting back in the win column? First win since April of 2018, taking out Antonio Carlos Jr. This was a close fight, but the type of win that I think Tavares needed to remind people that, hey, he's still sticking around here at middleweight. His last two opponents were Edmund Shabazzi, in which he didn't even get to do anything in that fight because he got knocked out so early. And then fought Israel Adesanya to a decision, which actually, I mean, all things considered with what Adesanya's done is actually pretty good. Granted, the Adesanya we have now is much different than the one that fought Tavares, but I thought a pretty good win. And for Carlos Jr., it's another close fight. He does not come out on top. He's had all decision losses his last three fights. Just your thoughts on this fight and maybe what's next for the winners and losers.
I've been saying for years, Carlos Jr. needs to move up to 205. Like, why cut so much weight to make a division where they're better grapplers? Like, Go to 205, be at a healthier weight, and take these guys down and sub them like that. It's not rocket science here. The guy can move up to a division where the grappling is not as established, and he should do that. I thought it was a close fight. I mean, I thought Tavares looked fantastic in terms of his build. Like he usually carried a little bit of baby fat on him. He looked really shredded in this particular fight. I thought his striking looked really good. His takedown defense has always been quite good, but certainly he stopped some doubles there that really surprised me. Like Antonio Carlos Jr. had some really good shots in that fight, and he stopped all of them. So good on him. I know our colleague Adam Martin took some flack for saying that Carlos Jr. won, but Carlos Jr. was clinching him against the cage for like 3 minutes of that third round. The first round was quite close. I think that the right person won. I had a 29-28 for Brad Tavares, but I don't know why people are piling on old Adam for saying that he thought that
we could do a whole podcast on that, but that's part of the reason I don't score rounds unless it's main events, because people are just so dumb when it comes to scoring fights as if they have the answer to everything. So yeah, shout out to Adam. I thought his scorecard was fine. I thought it was a close fight too. Like, I mean, look, when a fight's that close, I don't think it matters. It's those fans who just can't get over, I don't know, their fandom, or probably had a bet on the fight too. That could have been it as well. But yeah, so
people are always in the moment. They're always hypercritical of these kind of things. Adam should shrug it off. Really, I mean, it's
no,
it's
that's what I told him. Yeah,
people say he's not an actual judge. He's just doing it for fun.
Yeah, exactly. So people should look at it as that. The women's division, how about Julianna Pena getting the submission win over Sarah McMahon? I got to give credit to my co-host of the Victory Loves Company podcast, Jim West, who actually is Marion Renault's coach and called this. He says, look, Sarah McMahon, she breaks in every fight. That's exactly what happened against Marion Renault. She got submitted in that one. In this fight as well, I mean, the wrestling looked good, but Pena's got that submission game, and usually when McMahon gets in a tough spot, she tends to get submitted. Your thoughts on this? I think it's great for Pena because, she's been fighting nothing but killers. I know her record isn't great, but, nice to see her get a win here against someone that's not a former UFC champion or current champion.
Well, him and I are aligned on that one too, your co-host Jim. And I made 4 TSN Edge recommendations, and I'm never going to have a better night than I had this past weekend. So don't think that I'm some sort of Luca Fury wizard here that knows what he's talking about with all the sports handicapping. Right. But I had my 4 Edge recommendations. My loser was Dan Hooker, which was the highest odds of anything that I took. I had Dustin Poirier, I had Marina Rodriguez, and I had Pena by sub at plus 450 was another one of my recommended plays. And like Jim said, McMahon gets caught in subs all the time somehow. She always somehow finds her way. And it's funny because in the first round, I was like, her fight IQ is really improved. She's going for the takedown. She's holding the legs and she's taking side control where she's not in trouble. And then as the fight went on, she kept getting herself into worse and worse and worse spots. And Pena's submission game has always been dangerous. If you watched her on the Ultimate Fighter, her submission game was really shining. I don't think she had a single submission win in an official UFC bout, but she had a lot before she got to the UFC. She was doing it in the Tough House, and I knew that she had that part of her game. She didn't have the opponents that were tailor made for her to take advantage of it, and Mcmahon was one of those opponents.
Yeah, big win there for Julianna Pena. Mcmahon, it might be the end of the road here, honestly. 40 years old. I don't know where she goes from here in this division. Maybe they give her another prospect. She was supposed to fight Aspen Ladd, actually, before Ladd got her injury. So we'll see what happens there. I did see that Aspen Ladd's team sort of went after Julianna Pena after the fight, saying, you ducked us or whatever. So maybe that's a fight they put together later this year.
That's a good fight.
Yeah, like when Aspen's healthy. I know Aspen had mentioned she wanted Raquel Pennington, but we'll see. We'll see. I think Aspen's targeting sort of a summer return, so we'll see what happens there. Curious your scorecard on this one. Marcin Prashino getting the decision over Khalil Roundtree. I thought Roundtree won this one, but again, you can't leave it in the judges' scorecards. Prashino keeps his job, and Khalil Roundtree, another setback for him. I thought a good performance, but obviously not enough to get it done. What was your thoughts on the fight?
Yeah, such a close fight, and it's one of those ones where you look at it beforehand, and you see that Roundtree's got great power and knocking guys out, and then you've got Pacquiao losing in the first round by KO 3 times in a row. You thought it was just a slam dunk that he was going to get knocked out, but Pacquiao looked good. He utilized his strengths in karate to keep Roundtree at bay. He had much more volume. I thought it was a close fight. I think I also had it for Roundtree. I think I gave Roundtree the first and second, if I'm not mistaken.
Same here.
Yeah, because he rocked him in the second. I thought that was the only surefire Roundtree round. But Pacquiao, I mean, he deserves that win. I think that he did what he needed to do to win that fight, and certainly no controversy here in my mind in terms of that decision. But I know Roundtree's talked about retirement a bunch over the years. I don't know what his future is, but he just did not look like he was in it mentally in that fight. He looked like, he rocks Pacquiao in the second round, and then just backs up. I'm thinking, you got to swarm this guy. Now's your chance. He's not going to hit you with anything that's going to take you out. Pacquiao, I don't think is the biggest power puncher in the division, and we've seen Roundtree in there against the likes of Gokhan Saki and Anders and some bigger guys. I was just surprised he didn't go for the kill in that second round, but it just looked to me like something was not clicking with Roundtree. He looked like he was defeated early in that fight mentally. So I hope he does bounce back. I hope he does fight again. I like the guy. I think he's one of the nicer guys in the UFC, but at the same time, I didn't think that he showed up on Saturday.
No, he's hit or miss. There's some fights where he looks great, and there's some, like the Anders fight, like you referenced, where he put on a clinic in that fight, and then there's other fights like this one that I think got away from him. I mean, he should have got the win in my opinion, but he also didn't do anything that really made a decisive victory for him, and I think he's got to bite down on that. And the other thing is, I believe he went on Instagram after Instagram Live and said that he will continue to fight, so that's good. But he's got to start putting some wins together, because they're going to cut him loose if he keeps having performances like this. He's 8-5 now in his career with that loss. Really interesting fight, a catch weight, obviously because their opponents got switched up. We've got Mosavar Evlov taking out Nick Lentz by split decision. Shouldn't have been a split decision. I thought Evlov definitely won this fight. But
It definitely shouldn't have been a split decision.
Yeah, it was absolutely a unanimous. But how crazy was it that Nick Lentz got that guillotine choke early on, and I thought he had him, and the announcers did too. But he escapes it. It was like nothing. You saw his demeanor. It seemed like he was just going for a walk or something. That his demeanor. I don't know how he was able to overcome that, but he does it. Of course, we know now Nick Lentz retiring. It's too bad he didn't go out on a win as a big underdog. But Evlov, I thought, looked pretty solid overall, but I need to see a little bit more from him before we start talking about him as a guy to keep an eye on it at 145. But what were your thoughts on his performance?
Definitely Mousasi-esque in his approach, Joe, in terms of how composed he stayed during that fight. I thought the line was off on this one, but it turned out not to be. I mean, Nick Lentz, I thought bigger fighter. Guys fought at 55 before. Evloev was a 35er. This was a catch weight at 150 pounds. I thought Evloev's path to victory against pretty much anybody is the wrestling. His striking looked better too, but I mean, I didn't think that he was going to handle Nick Lentz like that. And then Nick Lentz, after the fact, came out and said, "Listen, I'm fighting with 40% vision. I'm calling it a day." Clearly he's not the same fighter as he once was, and I think that's obviously a wise decision for his long-term health. Evloev looks really good. I really wanted to see the fight between Evloev and Landwehr. I thought that was going to be a good spot for Landwehr to win, but Evloev's improving a lot, and I think that maybe the next time they're matched up, I might hesitate a little bit more if that matchup ever ends up coming together again. I know they were both champions in M1 before, but I was hoping to see that one, but I think that the win over Nick Lentz, certainly Evloev is showing a lot of improvements.
And Landwehr's now fighting, I think, Julianna Rosa coming up in a few weeks. So obviously they've moved on from that, which is a bummer. I did like that fight as well, the two former M1 champs. But look at this resume here for Nick Lentz. A lot of people Talking smack yesterday, I did read some of the comments. I know him and BJ Penn had a bit of a feud, so I'm sure that contributed to that. But look at this. I mean, Arnold Allen, Charles Oliveira, you've got Gray Maynard in here. You've got Islam Makhachev. He actually fought Oliveira a couple times. Danny Castillo.
3 times.
Yeah, 3 times. That's right. Chad Mendez. I mean, you look at some of the names here. Evan Dunham back in the day, Tyson Griffin, Andre Winner. Maybe we can forget that one. But, in general, what I'm kind of getting at here is, yeah, he's a guy that has a good resume. He's fought some tough guys, so nothing but the best for Nick Lentz, who's actually killing it on the stock market. That was one of the things we got to talk about in our last interview. Was he's doing quite well outside the cage, so good to see he's found a career and had to adjust things. And yeah, he wasn't sure if he was ever going to see again out of that eye. So the fact that he got one more in and was able to sort of change his focus from fighting to other things, I think is good for him. So wish nothing but the best for Nick Lentz going forward. And the last fight on the card opening up the UFC 257 event, Mir Albazi, what a performance that was. He was an underdog. Actually, he closed as a favorite. I think he opened as an underdog, closed as a favorite, but he looked like a favorite. Pretty good win there. I like the fact that they put this fight as the opening one, because I thought Albazi really got to showcase himself. And he's a guy to keep an eye on at 125, still relatively young, and comes to us from Sweden. Pretty solid fighter overall, and I like the overall game of him. And at 27, I think they're getting him at a great time in a flyweight division that appears to be moving in the right direction now. But what did you think of Albazi to open up the card?
Yeah, he's big for the division, strong for the division. I think he's got a really good future, like you mentioned. I think Zhumagulov's a really good fighter too. He's just getting bad matchups, but yeah, Albazi, he was ranked going into that fight because the flyweight division, as we know, is not very stacked, at least from a standpoint of bodies. But I think that Albazi certainly is a guy that's going to be able to hang with a lot of the top guys, and there's no shortage of people. Why not match him up with Jimmy Flick? Like I think that would be a good one to kind of move the division along. I think a lot of Jimmy Flick. I think that he's a really dangerous fighter, and it would be interesting to see how Albazi deals with somebody like that.
I agree. I know Dan Levi would be a fan of that fight, always supporting the up-and-comers as well. So I think that would be a really cool matchup on that. All right, well, we talked about Conor McGregor, and a lot of people asking what is next for him. Well, I'm going to tell you, Aaron, this is what I think is the fight to make, and I know we discussed this a little bit on Twitter, so I'll get your thoughts on this after. But the fight is Tony Ferguson. This is so obvious to me, Aaron. You've got Tony Ferguson, who's coming off 2 losses pretty dominantly. And Conor, I think, would be catching Tony at a very good time. Tony's, up there in age, 37 years old, a lot of injuries, not a lot of fighting either because of injuries and things outside the cage as well. And you've got Conor, who obviously is coming off this big loss, but, you got to fight someone that you think he can beat. And at this stage in their careers, I think Conor can beat Tony Ferguson. And I think the fact that Ferguson, to me, is still the biggest name out there, also coming off a loss, I think this is a slam dunk. There's also some history there outside the cage, right? Ferguson being managed by Paradigm Forever, moving over to Vayner Sports. There's a good build up to this fight, and I think the type of trash talk that Conor needs. I mean, that was one of the things that people also mentioned, was that Conor being a little bit too polite heading into the fight, maybe not doing his typical trash talk. I think Tony Ferguson would bring that out of him, and I think that would be a very exciting fight to put together maybe this summer or whenever Conor wants to get back in there, and same thing with Ferguson. So your thoughts on that? Is this the fight to make, Aaron Bronsteter?
Well, I did. I put out a tweet saying this is how I would book the division. I would do Poirier taking on Oliveira. I would do Gaethje versus Michael Chandler, just because that's such a home run of a fight. But if you take Gaethje and you put him against Chandler, there was a rumor that they were trying to negotiate the return of Nate Diaz, and Gaethje seemed to be the prospective opponent. Take Nate Diaz and make the trilogy fight with Conor. I think now's the time for that, because if Conor can't beat Nate Diaz at this stage in his career, a guy that's not ranked at 155 pounds, I think the writing is on the wall. And I think that's a fight that would be great to see. I know they were talking about Nate coming back at 55. Make that fight at 55 for the trilogy fight. It's 1-1 at 170 pounds. I don't think that they need to prove at 170 pounds who the better fighter is. I think it's irrelevant, honestly. I don't think either of these guys are going to be competing for the 170 pound, title. I think both those guys are terrible stylistic matchups. Usman is a terrible stylistic matchup for both those guys. I think Burns is too. I think Covington is too. Welterweight division is what I'm saying. Stay at 55. But that's the way that I would like to see it play out. You make the trilogy fight between Nate and Conor. You do Poirier versus Oliveira. You do Gaethje versus Chandler, and then you do maybe Ferguson versus Dan Hooker or something along those lines to get one of those guys back into the win column.
Diaz would be my second choice. So I do agree with you there. I think that's a fight you could make. I think it's a winnable fight for Conor. The only thing I worry about in the Diaz fight is that Diaz is a very tough guy to finish. So if Conor can't put him out early or even later in the fight, we could have another close decision like we had in the second fight. So that could risk Conor not getting it. Obviously, the payday would be huge. Obviously, Diaz is a huge name. That would be a huge fight. That would easily be a headliner of a pay-per-view, even though it's not for a title.
Diaz has been stopped more often than Ferguson has.
Well, the cut and all that, but that's what I'm saying. Like in general, like actually being clean knocked out. I think Josh Thompson was the last guy to finish Nate Diaz. And that was a thrown in towel as well.
Has Ferguson ever been clean knocked out?
Gaethje finished him in their last fight, right?
It wasn't a knockout. It was the ref jumped in because he
Jumped in,
spit
but
out
that's
blood.
what I'm saying. I think a finish is more likely if Conor fights Ferguson as opposed to Diaz. That's what I'm getting at here. Maybe you can disagree with me on that one, but
I'm
that's
not sure that's the case. Conor throws a pretty mean left head kick that I think could take Diaz out. That's the same finish that Thompson had against
But who's
him,
taken more damage over the last couple fights? I think Ferguson for sure over Diaz.
For sure. Ferguson.
So that's where I'm coming with
damage.
this. I think you're getting a battered older Ferguson as opposed to a Diaz who, who knows what he's been doing, but he hasn't been taking a lot of shots. So I think I definitely agree with you. If Ferguson if they don't do the Ferguson fight, Diaz would be my next choice. But
here's another one nobody's talking about. Why not have him fight Masvidal at 170? Look, that would be my third choice.
That would be my third choice. Exactly.
Yeah. You just want to make a fun fight that doesn't really have a ton of stakes, and you want to just have a nice box office draw. It depends on what Conor wants to do. Like if Conor's like, no, I need to become the champion, or I need that. But if you have him beat Masvidal, you could still make a case for a trilogy fight with Poirier if you wanted to.
Of course.
I think that if he beats any of those guys, if he beats Ferguson, if he beats Nate Diaz, if he beats Masvidal, even if it's at 170, I still think you can make a case for a trilogy fight with Poirier. That's a big money fight. But you need to give Conor an opponent that is a stylistic matchup that he can beat. And it's not that he's going to beat any of those three guys. Who knows? But at the same time, I think Ferguson would be my second choice also. And if we both have Masvidal as our third choice, then I think we're
doing quite well. We're both Canadian. Maybe it's something in the air. I don't know. But yeah, I agree. And the thing is too, if he fought Masvidal at 170 and loses, I don't think it matters because he can always say it was in a different division. I don't know. That's
right, kind of 55.
Exactly. So there you go. I think there's a lot of good choices, but not the trilogy with Poirier. Not Gaethje. I've seen some people throw that out as well. I just think that's too dangerous of a fight without an upside. Obviously, Gaethje's ranked high, but I still think that's a risk.
Especially with the leg kicks.
With the leg kicks, and then people said RDA, but it's like, and I know they used to fight, but I don't think anyone even remembers that he was supposed to fight RDA at 196, right? Like, unless you're a hardcore fan, a casual fan probably didn't even remember that he was supposed to fight Rafa dos Anjos. So I don't see any reason to do that. There's going to be no trash talk. To me, you need a good build-up fight. Masvidal would do that. Nate Diaz would do that. And Ferguson would do that. That's what you need in a fight with Conor McGregor to get him back to his roots. I think that's what the big thing is there. So there you go. That's what we think for Conor McGregor. The other thing we talked about was Michael Chandler. And one of the things I just kind of wanted to point out here, and we talked about the level of competition in Bellator, but I think Chandler's win shows once again that fans got to start giving Bellator a little bit more respect. Look, Chandler was not fighting better opponents in Bellator heading into the UFC. However, there are some good fighters in Bellator, and this idea that Bellator is just a B league, I mean, there's good fighters in that organization. AJ McKee, Chandler, Pitbull, the guy who beat Chandler. No one's talking about him. He's the last guy to finish Michael Chandler. I mean, how good does that win look now? I think it's just another reminder that you can't always judge a book by its cover. This whole attitude, I don't know why it's like this, Aaron. I don't. Where fans will pick sides. They'll say UFC is so superior to Bellator or vice versa. Why can't we just enjoy all fighters and say that some fighters are good that, in Bellator that could do well in the UFC or vice versa? I'm sure there's some UFC fighters that would do well in Bellator. I've always disliked this rivalry between the promotions. I think fans just should enjoy all MMA and stop disrespecting the fighters. When people say Bellator is the B leagues, I disagree because there are some high level fights that you can put on. I mean, like an AJ McKee or a Douglas Lima, they would do well in the UFC. I'm convinced of it. And I think Chandler just proved that. And I think this was a big win for Bellator. I do. To see Chandler come over, get a first round finish. You had Eddie Alvarez before that come over, become a UFC champion. People got to start putting more respect on Bellator's name, in my opinion. What are your thoughts on that?
And you also have to commend Bellator for putting out all kinds of Michael Chandler highlights last week. People wanted to see Michael Chandler and what he looked like, and they capitalized on that by not trying to bury the guy, but by actually showing really good highlights of him, which I thought was, I mean, you're basically promoting the rival organization by doing that, but at the same time, you understand that people want to see Michael Chandler highlights to put them out. You're still going to get something out of it, right? And you're also not going to look petty. But the one thing I'll say that I disagree with you on is that if you look at Bellator and PFL and some of these rival promotions, I think you can still say that the top competition from top to bottom of any weight class is in the UFC.
100%. Yeah, I agree with that.
If you look at the guys at the very top of those divisions, let's go. I did this with Joe Valfellini yesterday when we talked. Go division by division in Bellator. Tell me Juan Archuleta doesn't hang with the top 5 guys in the bantamweight division of the UFC. Tell me that Patricio Pitbull doesn't hang with the top 5 guys in the 45 and 55 pound division in the UFC. Tell me Douglas Lima doesn't hang with the top 5 guys. Michael Page, I think, would hang with a lot of the top guys at 170 pounds. You look at Mousasi, obviously has already hung with the top guys in the 185 pound division in the UFC. Nemkov might be better than Jan Blachowicz. Who knows? Yeah. And then in the heavyweight division, I think Bader, matches up pretty favorably in that division as well with his wrestling. So, and then the other thing people don't talk about is Gaethje and Marlon Moraes from the World Series of Fighting. Now the PFL, like those guys have proven how good they are too. I know Moraes has had a bit of a stumbling block lately, but he still fought for the title. We can't ignore that. And Gaethje, of course, was the interim champion, and still I think has the potential to become the champion based on the adjustments that he's made to his game. So you're right. We certainly need to give the respect to the people that have earned championships in these other divisions, and not say, well, they wouldn't beat any of these top 15 guys in the UFC or top 5 guys in the UFC. We need to give them their due. They are still able to create elite fighters outside of the UFC, and we need to acknowledge that.
Very well said. Couldn't have said it any better. That's why I asked you to say it, because you can't say it better than me. We've got, we'll talk a little bit of news before we wrap things up and answer a few questions here. Stipe Miocic finally going to be rematching Francis Ngannou, UFC 260, the main event. Before I get your pick on this, why do you think this fight took so long to make? Because, I remember Ngannou did an interview, I think it was Brian Campbell a few months ago, saying, they were still working on the fight. I don't know if it was on Stipe's end, but do you have any insight as to why this fight took so long to put together?
I would guess that Stipe's end was trying to prolong it as much as possible so he can recover more. And I think he's earned the right to recover more. I think that you're in those heavyweight wars with Daniel Cormier. He got knocked out in the first one, and then he's fought, 9 rounds with him since then? That's not easy. And you take a lot of damage, and you look at Ngannou. I think the longer you keep him on the shelf waiting, the more of a potential for rust there is. That being said, I don't think Ngannou's power is going to suffer from him not getting in there. If anything, it might make him angrier or more emotional. And we also have to remember that Stipe in that first fight won that fight, and he won it pretty easily. So I wouldn't want to write off Stipe, as a lot of other people have been as well. This is a similar situation to what we just saw over the weekend with Poirier and Conor McGregor. We're ignoring a lot of the knowledge that we have about these two going into this one. But if I had to guess, I think the reason why it took so long to put together was because Stipe wants a little bit more time to recover and probably wants to keep Ngannou waiting a little bit.
Yeah. And also what they did to him with, trying to get his next fight after he lost his title to Cormier, they kind of, they not jerked him around, but you could see they were kind of like taking their time to book that rematch. So I don't know if that played into it as well. Your early pick on this fight, I'll get it. Again, this isn't an official pick, but I do want to ask. I'll tell you mine. I think Ngannou beats him this time. I think he knocks him out. And I think those years off, the years in between their first fight where Stipe, did get knocked out by Cormier. He's getting older. I think something's got to give. And I just think a lot of guys right now, and Ngannou's made improvements too. I mean, since going to Extreme Couture, leaving his coach, Fernand Lopez, I think you've seen the improvements as well. But my early pick is Ngannou. And I picked, I think, Stipe in all of his fights, most of them anyways. Where are you going on this one?
Yeah, it's tough because it's really hard to overlook the power of Francis. It's similar to this past week where I said, if Dustin gets out of the first, second round, it becomes his fight. I think Stipe just needs to survive one round. If Stipe gets out of that first round, I think he wins the fight. I think he'll have solved Francis by then. And I think Francis will have gotten frustrated that he didn't get the finish by then. But how many finishes does Francis have outside of the first round? The first Blades fight comes to mind, but I think that might be it.
Second Blades fight.
The second Blades fight was the second round too?
Oh, no, sorry. It was first round. Oh, you're saying out of the first round. Well, Derek Lewis, that was a loss and a decision, right?
Yeah. But how many wins? I mean, because he went out of the first round with Stipe and lost too. How many wins does he have outside of the first round? I think it might just be that first Blades fight. So that's when you start to take him into an uncomfortable territory. And Stipe, I think, has the fight IQ to maybe make that happen. So let's wait and see. I believe in Francis more this time around than I did last time. I liked Stipe in the first fight. I think you did too. I think you and I were among the very few that did.
I know.
But I think that this time around, I would lean a little bit more towards Francis than I did the last time.
That's exactly how I feel as well. By the way, we don't have the odds yet on blitzbet.eu, but I'm seeing most lines actually have Stipe as the underdog, which, I mean, I think he was the underdog.
He opened this up as a pretty big underdog, if I recall.
Yeah. This time around, he's about the same as he was before as I'm looking at some of the lines. But just wanted to point that out as well. Does John Jones get the winner, do you think?
Yeah, 100%. 100%.
Yeah,
and
I think so too.
Dana White was saying he thinks it'll happen in July, but I can tell you now that if Stipe wins that fight, it's not happening in July. But if Francis wins and Francis gets a quick knockout, then you can make that fight the next weekend for all Francis cares, I'm sure. Yeah, it'll be interesting. I'm very curious to see how Jones does at heavyweight with the fact that he'll be fighting guys that hit like trucks. I mean, there's some good knockout guys in light heavyweight. You got Glover, you've got Thiago Santos, but I mean, to get a Francis Ngannou hit is a level above, in my opinion. So we'll see how that. There's also the range, though. I think that Jones. True. I don't know if Francis has fought anybody with the kind of range that John is able to create with his reach. So I think that John, if he fights a tactical fight against Francis, can win that fight. But like you said, if he gets hit by Francis, I'm sure that's not going to be like anything he's ever felt before.
Yeah, it's too bad Francis never fought Volkov. That would have solved that problem, right? To see how Volkov would do with the lanky arms. But yeah, we'll see what happens there. And then the other bit of news we'll talk about, and then we'll get to questions here. It's not official, but Ariel Helwani from ESPN reporting Tyron Woodley, Vicente Luque next. I think this makes a lot of sense. What are your thoughts on the matchmaking here?
I listened to Tyron Woodley on Real Quick with Mike Swick, and he said that he had a fight lined up in March. So I'm guessing that must be what it is. It's interesting that he would accept a fight with a guy who is such a close training partner of the guy that just beat him in Gilbert Burns. Because Luque and Burns train together every day. What is the line on that? Is that out yet?
I'm looking at it now. I'm just trying to see. They don't have it booked for an official card yet, but I would guess that.
I think it'll be minus 175 Luque.
Oh yeah, I agree with that. Yeah.
Yeah, that's probably where I would line it.
Yeah, it doesn't look like we have odds yet. I'm just going to quickly do a search, but yeah, it doesn't seem like we have odds because they just announced this weekend, so no, we don't have odds yet.
Yeah, well, I mean, here's the problem. I mean, Woodley just hasn't looked good. I mean, there's just no way around it. And Luque is a very similar fighter to Gilbert Burns. I don't think he has the same ground credentials, but on the feet, comparable. And that's how Gilbert beat Woodley. I would have to lean towards Luque in this fight,
Same.
But I don't know. It's hard to ignore how good Woodley once was, but you kind of have to because the most recent fights he's lost 9 rounds in a row or something along those lines, maybe more.
Yeah.
No, well,
he's not a contender anymore.
Usman also.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No,
so I mean, yeah, I think that you have to kind of lean Luque.
Yeah, and I was going to say, I think people forget just the power that Luque has. Luque is still the only guy, I think, to knock out Bilal Muhammad as well. And Muhammad's a pretty durable guy. So for him to do that, it was in the first round. I think that was on the New York card 205 that we were at, which is pretty crazy. So yeah, my early pick as well as Luque. And I think, if Tyron loses this, it's got to be the end of the road. I would think, what do you do with him at this point? If you can't beat a prospect I still kind of consider Luque a prospect with his age and where he's situated in the division. I think it's good matchmaking because they're obviously trying to build up Luque. And hey, guess what? If Woodley wins, then he's a guy you can put in big fights again, right? So
that's for sure. Yeah, I mean, and if Woodley wins, maybe he ends up going to Bellator also off of a win. I think we might see him in Bellator at some point in time. I mean, he has the relationship with Scott Coker. Yeah. But it depends on how much longer he wants to keep fighting. Because if he gets blown out by Luque and it's 4 straight losses in a row, where he's lost because Usman beat him on the cards. He hasn't been. Oh no, he got finished by Colby, but he's basically fought he's lost basically 14 rounds in a row or something along those lines, right? So if he loses another 3, is that going to be the main event probably?
Maybe, yeah. I don't know.
What's the date of it?
I don't think they had a date there. I think they were just talking about it in general. I
think the main events are set for March. So it'll probably be a 3-round fight.
Yeah, so that'll be interesting. One of the few times that Woodley's had a 3-round fight, at least recently, right? Because he was the champ, and then he's had a lot of main events since then. Let's get to some questions here. We'll just do a few, and then we'll wrap things up here before we close out the show here.
James, we've got quick. It's supposed to be UFC 260, so I would assume that he is not going to be the main event.
Okay.
Oh, of course.
I thought it was the 27th. Yeah, so it'll be on the main card.
Plus, kind of a tough sell giving a guy 3 straight losses a main event at this point. I know it's Woodley, but there's got to be something. This isn't Conor McGregor here. Conor McGregor lose 8 fights in a row. He's still headlining a card, I would think.
Right.
There you go. Yeah, let's get to questions here in the chat. Reed points out that Overeem Lesnar was the best debut. When Overeem beat Lesnar, yeah, that's true actually. Yeah. So I was thinking Lesnar. Yeah, that was
body kick looked like a guy getting hit in the body with a baseball bat.
Yeah, the way that few. I'd have to go back and look.
Yeah, that's true. That's a good one.
Dan Tom in the chat. Shout out to Dan. Thanks for watching. Zabel, I think is how you say it. He says Hooker needs to take a year off. In my opinion, he took some punishment in the last year. I mean, I guess, yeah, I don't think it would hurt, but I think we'll probably see him fight again this year. What do you think?
Well, he left the gloves in the cage, and nobody has really heard anything about that at this point in time. But he's still young. He's still 30 years old. The problem with him right now is that the traveling in and out of New Zealand takes basically it's more than 10% of his year is dedicated to this one fight that he fought for whatever, under a minute or whatever it was. Basically, he's salvaged 10% or more of his year just through travel because he can't return to New Zealand until February 21st. So he's in Abu Dhabi basically now for another month, waiting to get back home. And then when he gets back home, he needs to quarantine in a hotel for 2 weeks. And this is a guy with a kid, right? So he's going to have to pick a spot. That's for sure. I wouldn't blame him if he sat out the rest of the year.
There you go. Good insight there from Aaron. Zabel also says Edmund versus Antonio Carlos Jr. is the fight to make. Yeah, I mean, you got a guy in a losing streak.
I don't think so.
No?
I think you've got to give Edmund somebody with a little bit more profile. Even against... Edmund hasn't fought Tavares yet, has he?
Yeah, he knocked him out in the first round.
Oh, he
that was
knocked him
the
out.
244
Okay.
card that we were
Yeah,
at.
I thought that sounded familiar. But
Yeah, no worries.
if he's knocking out Brad Tavares, why are we putting him against the guy that Brad Tavares just beat? Like, I think that there are a lot of other names in the division that you could put him up against that would be a little bit more fun.
I think I'm looking at this top 15 here. I mean, Omari Akhmedov, you got Tavares, you've got Heinisch. Like, I mean, I don't think I think those would be competitive. I think at this point, like I said, Edmund needs a bounce back fight, in my opinion, because you built him up. I think someone else.
Omari Akhmedov's a good one. I don't mind that. That would be fun.
Yeah, I guess you could do that one. Yeah.
And who's Weidman facing again?
He's facing Uriah Hall rematch.
Yeah, maybe have him face the winner of that fight or the loser of that fight.
Yeah, maybe him and Weidman. We've been hearing that for a while. That would make sense. If Weidman loses, there you go. That would be probably an accurate fight there as well. A couple other questions here in the chat. Zabel says Masvidal is a horrendous fight for Conor. 170-pound puncher with good calf kicks. No way. Here's the thing that I've kind of seen, and he's not really implying this, but I've heard this before, that Masvidal is way bigger than Conor. He's not actually. I think Masvidal is a little bit taller, but McGregor actually has a 74-inch reach. Masvidal only 73, so it's not like he's a huge fighter compared to him just because he fights at 170.
Yeah, and I mean Masvidal does train with Dustin too, so they might have a similar game plan going into that one. But yeah, I mean, is it a bad matchup? Who knows? But I think it's a more winnable fight than Dustin.
Listen to this. Abs Talks. Shout out to Abs who joined me on the chat, on the live stream chat I did on the weekend. He says Ariel just released an interview with Kavanaugh where he said that they want the Poirier rematch ASAP, or trilogy fight, I guess in this case. If that doesn't happen, he might go to boxing. Connor's team applying pressure. What are your thoughts? I mean, that's a tough sell. I think I could see if Conor had lost a close decision, or he lost like a last minute stoppage, or it was like a quick knockout in the first round. He didn't get a chance to get his bearings, but I think that's a tough sell even for Conor at this point, for him to try and go get the trilogy. And in boxing, who's he going to box? Pacquiao's boxing Ryan Garcia. I mean, I don't know. I think if you're Conor, like, I think this is a bad move on him and Kavanaugh's part. I think they should try.
But you know what? It's not a tough sell, because it's the fight. It's the fight that will generate the most money for the UFC right now. We always have to remember that this is promotion versus sport, and there's always going to be a situation where the UFC can say, "Hey, we need to make this rematch. Conor's a former champion. We can put the belt on the line." Listen, I don't think it's the right move to make, but to discount it as something that's not going to happen, Dana White certainly didn't seem like he was pointing. Usually he'll point in that direction if that's the way that he's thinking. He'll say, "Yeah, I think this rematch needs to happen." He wasn't saying any of that this past weekend, but you don't want to lose that fight, right? Like that fight is your big money generator right now. So you either need to give Conor a very favorable matchup with a big name, and that's why I like the Nate fight, or you've got to do the trilogy, because they don't want to lose this trilogy. They just lost Conor versus Khabib too, which would have generated them a ton of money. So they got to be careful with what the Conor's next move is going to be. This next fight is the biggest fight of his career, whatever it is, whoever it's against. This is the one that's going to define the rest of his career.
That's why you got to be careful. That's why Poirier, I don't think, even though he won that first round, I think that's still a little bit of a risk fighting him. I think he needs a bounce back, but we'll see there as well in terms of that. We got a funny question here from Matt Wells in the chat. He says, "What's up, fellas? I'm still trying to figure out how Amanda Nunes ducked Julianna Pena. Any clue?" Yeah, that was weird, right? That whole thing.
Well, the way that Nunes responded was exactly what I thought when Pena called it out. It was like, you had the opportunity on so many occasions to establish yourself as the number one contender, and you never did it. Like, there was every time Pena was supposed to beat somebody to be the next in line, like the fight against Durandame. If she would have won that fight, she would have been next in line. The fight against Shevchenko, if she would have won that fight, she would have been next in line. She always seems to squander that opportunity. So for her to come out and call out Nunes, I mean, I understand why she's calling out Nunes, and it's good to build up that kind of beef, because one more win, she's right there. But yeah, I don't think that Nunes is ducking anybody on this planet.
Okay, we'll take two more questions, then wrap things up here. We've got Max Holloway, not the real Max Holloway, in the chat saying Megan Anderson beats Nunes via toe to the eyes. Yeah, I'm sure Max not watching the show as much as I love Max. I don't think he's doing that. Here's what I will say about the Anderson Nunes fight. To me, it's more interesting than the Felicia Spencer fight with Nunes, because Anderson's bread and butter is her stand-up, and we know, like we saw with Poirier this weekend, that like anyone can, if you can throw a good shot and you can hit your opponent, I mean, anything can change a fight, right? So I think stylistically, it's a more interesting matchup, because Spencer was never going to get Nunes to the ground. At least I never had that indication that she was going to do that. With Anderson, I mean, there is a small chance I think she could maybe pull something out in the stand-up, but I mean, obviously, if you look at the odds, Nunes is getting up to those boxing odds right now on Anderson. But what are your thoughts on that? Because I think as a style matchup, it's much more interesting than some of her past opponents for Nunes.
It should be the boxing odds, and I think if it gets to the ground for even a moment, that fight's over. But we'll see.
Yeah. Well, do you think Nunes? Yeah, I'm just wondering. Do you think Nunes takes her to the ground? I mean, why play that?
I think Nunes tries to take her to the ground immediately. Nunes isn't the type of person that tries to fight outside of her element. we have to remember that. I mean, the Cyborg fight might be one example of, but she won. I mean, she ended up, she must have trusted that her striking was better than Cyborg's. And I just don't expect her to bull rush in the same sort of way in this fight against Megan. I think that she'll probably try to get a takedown as soon as possible.
This isn't really a question, but I'll read it anyways. It's sort of our last one here. Shabazzi needs to fix his cardio. Yeah, I think there's a lot of things that Shabazzi can probably learn from that Brunson fight. Yeah, I've been trying to get an interview with him. His management hasn't been too receptive. Maybe he'll talk now.
Rousey's not answering your texts?
No, it's I actually deal with someone else who's in that camp. But yeah, I guess Rousey's like, I think Rousey's like a proxy manager, right? Just to say that she manages fighters, but I'm pretty sure there's other people who kind of do all that.
I would love to find out Ronda's numbers so I could just text her and be like, "Hi, I'm from TSN. Would love to interview Edmund. Are we able to set that up?" It's because she wouldn't expect that. That would come right out of the left field.
We should do it. There you go. Shoot your shot, Aaron. I think it makes a lot of sense. Good time to wrap up the show, guys. Thanks so much for watching. If you can, just hit that like button, hit the subscribe button. All that is an easy way to support the show. Aaron, what's going on with you? Anything coming up this week on the TSN MMA show, and anything else you want to plug? I'll give you the floor here.
Yeah, I typically do an interview edition, but I'm going to try to take it easy a little bit this week. I feel like I just got back from covering the event. That's how tired I am just from this past week. But I'm going to be I interviewed Gilbert Burns over the weekend, so that'll come out. And I'm doing the podcast with Bazooka Joe right after we're done right now. So we'll have that podcast up probably tonight. Myself, Joe, recapping the event, and an interview with Gilbert Burns. So that's what you'll get from me this week. And the next week, right back on the horse for the next event with some TSN Edge content. The pre-fight preview with your colleague Dan Tom, all that fun stuff. So follow me on Twitter at Aaron Bronsteter, and all of that stuff will be housed at that location.
And things don't stop here at Line Movement. I got a bunch of interviews scheduled for this week, as I usually do. I got a really cool one tomorrow, throwing that as a teaser. Not going to say who, because again, I never do that, because in case the interview doesn't come to fruition. But just trust me, it's someone you haven't heard from in a while. You guys will be thrilled about that. Like I said, follow us here on the channel. Subscribe. Follow me on Twitter and on Instagram at Lynch on Sports. Easy way to interact with me. My DMs are open. And thanks again for watching. Enjoy the weekend off, everyone. Get some rest. It's going to be a long stretch from here on out with UFC cards. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you guys next Monday previewing the Alistair Overeem and Alexander Volkov card. Thanks so much for watching, everyone. Have a good day.